Let's start this discussion off with a little State of the Union for Marvel Television. Out of all the projects to come out of Marvel Studios for TV, I think that the ones that involve Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead have stood out in my mind. After Loki Season 2, and to a slightly lesser extent Moon Knight, I don't know if that really actually fully counts though, because that was half them, half Mohamed Diab, so I don't know if it actually counts toward their batting average, but I think their batting average is pretty solid. There are people who will agree with me, there are people who will call me mean names and disagree with me and are completely allergic to the idea of someone enjoying something Marvel-related without a list of caveats that it's longer than the Treaty of Versailles. When I'm watching a show like Hawkeye or Falcon and the Winter Soldier, really what I'm thinking to myself is, what does this mean for the larger MCU? Or what MCU glup shitto is going to show up next week that I can clap and point at? But starting with Moon Knight, I was watching week to week because I was interested in the characters and the ideas that the show was peddling in. And of course, I loved that first season of Loki, but when season 2 started, I was just immediately gripped by the style and the filmmaking of it. When I was watching the first season of Loki, there were definitely a few moments, especially in the middle of the season, where I felt like I was watching just regular MCU fodder with slightly more interesting production design and characters than usual. But Loki Season 2, to this day, narratively and from a filmmaking perspective, hey, criminal, stop being a criminal. Stop being a criminal. Do you want me to show you to the camera? Criminal. Yeah? Oh, okay. Goodbye. Anyway, that second season of Loki, I still think, narratively and from a filmmaking perspective, is the most interesting thing Marvel Studios has ever done. I genuinely don't know if I am, catching a violent altercation outside, while I'm filming this, but there have been things that sound very loud, screeching tires, and people yelling. I don't know, the universe doesn't want me to do this right now, but you know what? I'm gonna push through. Stop. The universe is conspiring against me right now. Do we still sound okay? Yeah, we still sound okay. Anyway, yeah, Loki Season 2 has an ending, which is crazy to think about with the MCU. A lot of the characters have an actual endpoint that they're working towards, and there's this frankly beautiful sense of finality to Season 2 of Loki that gives it an edge narratively over so many other projects that Marvel Studios puts out. I think about that shot of Mobius standing in the distance, watching as another version of himself lives out the life that he could have had, that was taken from him by forces beyond his comprehension or his control. They use this telephoto lens to crunch in and do this extreme close-up of Owen Wilson's face with this warm blue sky behind him that really gives off this weird, eerie sense of surreal isolation. And there's a little bit of this subtle old color film stock emulation on the shot too that gives it this sense of nostalgia for something that he never had and that he can only experience from a distance, which is just insanely vividly captured by the aforementioned telephoto super far shot extreme close-up. And I genuinely mean it when I say that this shot of Owen Wilson's forlorn face just it pops into my brain so often and it haunts me. And it's so simple, but it's so complex. So it's masterful, it's thoughtful, and it is emblematic of the quality of Loki Season 2 as a whole. It's something that is so simple on the surface, but whenever you dig deeper, there's so many more layers to it. And to bring things on topic, with the guidance of new showrunner Dario Scardapane, who worked as a showrunner on The Punisher, Benson and Moorhead have kind of brought that same energy to these first 2 episodes of Daredevil Born Again, and it's so perfect. There was a very large and public sort of creative overhaul that Daredevil Born Again went through, which might not have turned out to be all that big anyway, but, that's a topic for another time. And they brought in Scardapane, Benson, and Moorhead to sort of bring out the show that they knew was hiding just beneath the surface of what they had.
And they called me up and I saw a lot of material, and it was really funny. We all got together, and I was like, here's what I think. And it was exactly what they thought. There was no direction. There was just more like, there was a show in there that I think the show that they had would be fine and dandy. There's no problem with it. But there was a show in there that wanted to come out.
Right.
And the show that wanted to come out was very much closer to what the old show was.
And it turns out that what it was missing was just some context, something that firmly grounds it in what came before.
It had a depth of drama and action that was just screaming to be there. And it needed a little context to get us there. And it needed to set up the world and the relationships to get us there.
So instead of telling your very well-established and built-in audience who loved the Netflix show for its character-driven, noir-ish crime drama to just forget what they saw and have been campaigning to bring back for years, they brought in the three most qualified people to do a little bit of an overhaul. Whatever they did, it worked, because they've created a show that, at least from the first two episodes, it doesn't seem to be a week-to-week, what does this mean for the wider MCU, or I wonder what big cameo is going to show up next week. It's a grounded show that keeps you coming back week to week because you're bought in on the characters and what is going on in their world. And that's just good television. I think that's what TV is supposed to be. It's the platonic ideal of what it looks like whenever a new writer or a new artist comes on to do the next run of a series. There's this sort of graceful way of acknowledging the continuity and tone of what came before and respecting that, but taking things in a new direction. Whereas the Netflix show was more of a narrow-focused character drama, this show seems to want to widen the scope a little bit. And not only narratively, but also just the way that it's presented as well. For one, it's shot 2:3:1. Obviously, more frame space, wider frame. You can have these wide shots of the city streets where there's so much going on, and it really gives you the sense that New York is a character in this show. And when we do punch in on a character, like the old show, we can kind of use the periphery of the frame for more visual interest, or to maybe even focus in on the character even more by isolating them in the frame. It all works. And even though there's more of a cinematic feel to the show now, it still feels very much in line with what the original show was. Visually, it kind of feels a little bit more like an elevated thriller horror than anything, which I guess kind of makes sense, because
what's funny is that you've probably never heard filmmakers reference like Hereditary more during a superhero or action thing than you've our reference points were so sad.
And we can even still play around with the color coding. That oppressively saturated yellow of those sodium streetlights in Hell's Kitchen. Even character-based color coding. Maybe Matt will be bathed in a red light in particular moments or something like that. And the added visual flair of widening and then narrowing the aspect ratio to illustrate Matt using his heightened senses. It's just oozing with style and flair, and which is something that it seems that Marvel has just been completely allergic to recently. But then again, you can't bring back this show without carrying over some of the choices that made it so fun for weirdo film studies nerds like me to watch. And rest assured that the show is still this gritty, violent, brutally introspective narrative that we loved in those first 3 seasons. And with this being a new iteration of this show, especially when we're talking about a show that's so multifaceted, and with all of its facets being as real and fearless in its grit as Daredevil, being born again isn't gonna come without a little bit of tragedy. And yes, I am using very vague, albeit accurate, platitudes to describe what these first 2 episodes have done so far, narratively, but that's only because I'm trying to put off discussing the big blue elephant in the room with a bullseye symbol on its forehead. We all knew it was coming. But it was just a question of whether it was going to be Foggy or Karen. And in all seriousness, we know it's not going to be Karen. She's somehow going to outlive Matt and Frank Castle, both, just through sheer chaotic tenacity. The first episode reaches out to give us this nice warm hug of Nelson, Murdoch, and Paige. The gang's back together, and they're having a little fun night out. It's like we never left. Matt's cracking jokes. Karen is doing some playful chastising of the boys while they do their little Hell's Kitchen nostalgia routine. Foggy's being comedically overconfident with his legal knowledge, trying to drunkenly impress a pretty lady at the bar, which, game recognized game. But then that warm hug is very rudely interrupted by a splash of cold water to the face. Bullseye's back. It's unclear if he just wants to hurt Matt for not letting him kill Fisk at the end of Season 3, or what his true intentions are. While Matt is distracted, he does the worst thing that he could possibly do to him, and he guns down his best friend.
He said someone was...
The fight that ensues is brutal, emotional, and exhausting. It's executed in this visceral, real-time way, presenting it as a one-take action sequence where Matt goes after Dex. All the while, he's listening to Foggy's heartbeat slow to a crawl, gasping for air, while Karen absolutely breaks down, trying to keep him alive. They end up on the roof, where Dex is attempting to make his getaway. Matt, more knife than man at this point, corners him and just unloads all of his fury onto Dex. He hears Foggy take his last breath. Matt asks Dex why he did it, and all that Dex has to offer is just a chuckle and a grin. And overcome with grief, Matt lets out a cry, and in a moment of weakness, he tosses Dex off the roof, just fully intending to take his life. And not to sound melodramatic, but also to absolutely be melodramatic about it, when it comes to things like this, when a narrative that you're invested in makes a decision that you might have a hard time coming to terms with, it comes down to a question of execution and purpose. Foggy's death is a very, very bold statement, and it is very obvious that it wasn't taken lightly. There are people who are going to take it and then use it as an excuse to just write off the show entirely. And that is just pure fandom brain rot. I'm sorry. Fandom, more like fandom. Excluding Tony Stark in Avengers Endgame, this is genuinely the most well-executed and thought-out and meaningful character death in the MCU. How else do you completely tear Matt down? Foggy and Karen both are his world, and in one night, one act of revenge that seemingly was just taken on a complete whim by a psychopath just completely destroys it. And then he's just forced to kind of remake himself. It's something real and it's something authentic. And that's what Daredevil has always been, a real, authentic superhero story set in a real and authentic world. Foggy's gone, and I'm obviously going to miss him too, but in a way, now he's kind of present through every aspect of the show going forward. Imagine if we got what was supposed to be the original version of this show, where it starts and Foggy and Karen are not gone for real or tangible reasons. They're gone because the creators of the show were just telling us to not pay attention to what we just saw. Just forget about the 3 seasons of television that you watched, getting to know and love these characters. And please, just don't completely write off a work just because the narrative took a turn that you personally don't agree with, okay? Like, I know your Pookie is gone, but he was my Pookie too. He was my Pookie too, okay? And now his absence and his death is just permeating throughout the whatever comes next.
That event, it feels like it rippled out through every character in the show in a way like it does in real life. There's no resolution in the third act and everything's okay. Everyone's still dealing with this grief going forward. And
that's very true, yeah.
And that right there is how you honor what came before while also going in a new direction. you blow it up in a spectacular, unexpected, and also at the same time very much expected fashion. An amazingly shot, choreographed, and acted moment. A tragically destructive moment that will no doubt give way for a triumphant rising from the ashes. And, or if you will, an opportunity to be born again. And after all of this, Matt is obviously taking this as an opportunity to try and better himself. But it seems that all this little experiment of No More Daredevil is doing is further reinforcing how he's denying himself the real him. Him and Fisk both. Fisk is obviously denying his true self as well. Trying to be above board, running for mayor, doing things out in the open, being somewhat of a conventional politician, or trying to be at least. These things obviously aren't for him. And the only difference between him and Matt is that Fisk has people around him who will find a way to enable him.
I mean, a lot of engagement, a lot of depth, a lot of spread, people sharing memes.
All it takes is some chronically online Groyper weirdo to say to him,
You get shit done. You made things happen for yourself, now you make things happen for New York. Mayor Fisk. That's the coolest fucking thing on the planet.
Oh, and by the way, whenever those two are in an interview and they deny any sort of influence that the modern political landscape has had on this story, they're lying to you.
How much did you guys talk about it? Was this a discussion at all?
Actually, nothing directly from current events, but
I'm just going to get on my soapbox for a second and say that the unprecedented amount of media capture by the American right wing probably means that there are Disney executives breathing down their necks, telling them to deny any parallels between Fisk's mayoral campaign and the MAGA movement, any current fascist oligarchy taking shape, since they might get silenced or disappeared for criticizing Dear Leader, of course. At least Dario isn't outright denying it, though.
Yeah, sometimes we're feeling a little like prescient, but all of this stuff was written long before the events have happened. So I don't really know, Is it just something that's in the air, or is it just, it's a story it's an archetypal story that's happened many, many times over the centuries.
But since I'm not under the thumb of any Disney executives, I'll go ahead and tell you that it is very obvious that Michael Gandolfini is very obviously meant to be some kind of representation of a J.D. Vance, soy right, chronically online debate bro, meme-obsessed Groyper to Fisk's kind of charismatic pseudo-populist poster boy. And yes, the celebrations of Fisk's election in the streets turning violent, the ill-fitting slim-fit suits with brightly colored baseball caps printed with political slogans, it's all right there. And frankly, anyone who denies it, they're being anti-intellectual. I mean, there's no other way to put it, I guess. And what matters really is not only Matt's handling of Fisk's election to the office of mayor, the city itself is also very much a character. Fisk is taking a hard stance on vigilantes and tapping into an anxiety that it seems a lot of people have around superheroes in Manhattan. Questions of accountability and transparency around those who wear a mask. Some of the police feeling like they're becoming obsolete, others feeling like they should be able to take matters into their own hands the same way that these vigilantes do. Seemingly feeling a sense of empowerment just seeing what these so-called heroes get away with. After all, they have the badge. They ostensibly have the mandate to do, and these vigilantes don't. Shouldn't they be able to do what someone like the Punisher does? Obviously no. What, are you fucking crazy? It's crazy that we live in a world where characters, Daredevil, Spider-Man, the Punisher, aren't real, and people still need this explained to them. The badge shouldn't be a free pass to go on a power trip, but the institution of the police doesn't do a lot to deter that behavior. After all, it is kind of the police's job to protect the interests of the ruling class. Most of the time that means protecting private property rights, which it's a whole other can of worms, or exasperating racial and cultural tensions to prevent people from developing any sort of class consciousness in tandem with the media, of course. You'll forgive me for being so blunt, but like a lot of cops out there will sooner tackle and strangle a black kid for stealing a pack of Skittles before they'll give you a safe ride home from the bar after you've had too much to drink. The roots of this culture in American police do run very deep, and it is this culture and this attitude that attracts the type of people who do see the badge as a free pass to go on a power trip. And those same people will also idolize figures like the Punisher, who to them looks like just some guy who just will take matters into his own hands. He's a main character. I am a main character. I'm a cop. I am the thin blue line. I am the thin blue line that stands between Western civilization and that 12-year-old kid selling loose cigarettes. And I now have to mag dump into the child with my service weapon adorned with a Punisher skull decal. And of course, for anyone who actually understands the character of Frank Castle, they would know that people who engage in this behavior would absolutely be targets of the Punisher. The Punisher doesn't do what he does because he feels empowered to do it by some mandate given to him by a label slapped on to him by some institution or the state. He does it because he feels a burden that was imposed on him by those institutions. He was chewed up and spat back out, stomped on, and then left to rot by a system that has no sympathy for him. And it's his mission to do whatever he can to make sure that something like that doesn't happen to as many people as possible. Whether that means taking down predators or human trafficking, corrupt officials, and agents of those machines that grind people up and then cast them aside, like what happened to him. This whole thin blue line misappropriation of the Punisher's iconography is something that Marvel Comics has had kind of a hard time reconciling with. There was that time that they tried to give him a new symbol, which, I mean...
Dude, put that thing away! They're like children here!
But in 2019, we did finally get someone who wanted to take it head on. Matthew Rosenberg, Punisher 13. That's the issue where Frank just straight up tells the NYPD that his symbol is not theirs to use. It's a very important moment in the character's history in the comics, but it's an issue that has been begging to be addressed on screen. And so far, this show has suggested that it is not going to be pulling any punches. We know Frank's going to show up later on in this season and play a big role. We've already had someone even call out the thin blue line slogan.
We're the thin blue line, not them.
We get sued and they get cheered.
You know, I thought that they were going to walk on eggshells, and I thought that they were going to, there was going to be some ambiguity or something. But no, in the first 2 episodes, we already have absolutely villainous NYPD cops who are misappropriating the Punisher's imagery and exhibiting that same behavior that we see in real life with cops who either have or really want to take things a little too far. All of this seems to be kind of spurred on by Fisk's rhetoric and him slipping back into his old ways, blackmailing the police commissioner. All of this while Matt is supposed to be building his new Daredevil-free life. By the end of episode 2, he finally gives in to that other half of himself that he's been trying very hard to deny. Those greasy cops come to blows with Matt as he was trying to protect a potential victim of theirs. Matt takes the beating that they give him for as long as he can stomach it, just doesn't want to bring that part of himself out again. He says,
I'm down to this.
Just as much to himself as to the Punisher fanboys. After all, he did make a vow. He would do things right, do things by the book, like Foggy would have wanted. But these two seem to not have any qualms with just straight up murdering a high-profile attorney who is attached to a case that they're both involved in. But hey, it doesn't matter that he's a very public figure attached to this case that they're both also involved in. He got in their way. He got in the way of their wanton violence spurred on by, no doubt, some kind of insecurity. And so Matt does what Matt do. just like that, Daredevil and the Kingpin both are born again. Does that work? I don't know. I don't know if that works. It's okay, everyone. Voice crack. Oh my, real voice reveal? Anyway, it's okay, everybody. The episode 3 doubled down on everything that I said about how the cops are misappropriating the Punisher's imagery to do really bad things, and the show is not pulling its punches, and I'm very happy that we're not walking on eggshells and being ambiguous about and bootlicking and being cowards. Yay.